January 2026, the Persian Gulf. The board is set, the pieces are moving. If you listen to the press briefings from the Pentagon, the United States has already achieved strategic dominance. They point to the northern Arabian Sea. They show you the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN 72, the Scalpel, the carrier equipped with the F-35C Lightning II. They tell you that fifth-generation stealth has locked down the airspace. Then, they point to the ground. They show you Operation Agile Spartan. The United States Air Force has deployed the 494th Fighter Squadron to the region, the F-15E Strike Eagles, the heavy hitters. The trucks carrying 23,000 pounds of ordnance each. On paper, the equation looks balanced. You have the invisible ghost in the air. You have the brute force on the ground. The media calls this a perfect deterrent. But here at Navy Decoded, we do not look at press releases. We look at the math. And when you run the logistics calculus on this perfect deterrent, it collapses. There's a fatal flaw in this formation, a gaping hole in the sustainment logic that no one is talking about. Look at the F-15E. It is the king of the sky. Yes, but it is a slave to the ground. It requires a fixed runway. It requires concrete infrastructure in Qatar or the UAE. In 2026, against an adversary like Iran, a fixed runway is not an asset, it is a target. Iranian ballistic missile doctrine is built entirely around runway denial. If the conflict goes kinetic, those airbases are erased in the first 10 minutes. If the runway is gone, the F-15E is nothing more than a museum exhibit. Now look at the Lincoln. It survives because it moves, but it fights with the F-35C to maintain stealth, to be the scalpel. The F-35 must carry its weapons internally. Physics dictates geometry. The internal bays are small. They cannot carry the volume of fire required to dismantle a nation-state's infrastructure. The Lincoln is excellent for the day one strike, but what happens on day 7? What happens when the war turns into a grinding attrition fight? The Lincoln runs out of punch. The Air Force runs out of runways. The United States runs out of options. To solve this equation, we don't need another miracle jet. We need a ghost from the Atlantic. Right now, steaming east from Norfolk is the variable X. The USS George H.W. Bush, CVN 77. The Pentagon has not officially confirmed it is joining the Lincoln. They call it routine training. Do not believe the handshake. The math demands this ship's presence. It is the inevitable solution to the logistics gap. But this ship brings something that the Lincoln does not. It brings a soul. This ship carries the name of the only president who was shot down in combat and survived to lead the nation. It carries the ghost of a 20-year-old pilot drifting in the Pacific Ocean. 1944. Bleeding, but unbroken. Refusing to surrender to the sea. That is the DNA burned into the steel of CVN 77. It is the spirit of resilience. It doesn't glide, it stomps. It doesn't hide in the shadows, it owns the horizon. This ship was not built for politicians, it was built for pilots. Its call sign is Avenger. It carries the spirit of a man who knows what it feels like to dive into anti-aircraft fire. But, while the soul is perfect, the body is broken. CVN 77 is the black sheep of the fleet. It is the 10th and final ship of the Nimitz class, but it is not a Nimitz, not really. It is a mutant. It is a transitional platform, caught between the proven engineering of the past and the experimental physics of the future Gerald R. Ford class. And like all experiments, it has a defect, a structural scar. CVN 77 fights a congenital list due to the radical displacement of the bulbous bow and the shifted island. The ship has a natural, permanent tendency to roll to starboard. So, how did the Navy fix this multi-billion-dollar drift? Did they redesign the hull? No, that was too expensive. They chose the brute force solution. They didn't just rely on pumping water. Fluid is unstable. Instead, they performed corrective surgery. Deep in the bowels of the ship, on the port side keel, engineers installed hundreds of tons of solid ballast. We are talking about massive blocks of dead weight, pig iron and lead, welded permanently into the voids. Think about the physics of that. To make the Bush effective, they had to intentionally make it heavier. They added parasitic mass. They anchored the port side down to stop the starboard side from rising. It is a linebacker wearing ankle weights to stay balanced. This is the heavy price of being a mutant. So, here is the thesis. Here is the question that defines the strategy of 2026. Why does the United States send a ship that lists to the right? Why send a Frankenstein vessel, one that drags dead iron through the water, to the most dangerous choke point on Earth? Because war is not a beauty pageant. When the stealth wears off and the runways are craters, you don't need perfection. You need vengeance. The Lincoln is there to pick the lock. The Bush is coming to kick the door down. To understand why the George H.W. Bush is the linchpin of this operation, we have to strip away the glamour of the F-35 and look at the gritty reality of sustainment. We have to analyze the triangle of destruction that the U.S. Navy is trying to build. First, let's drill deeper into the failure point of the F-15E Strike Eagle. Operation Agile Spartan relies on the concept of ACE, Agile Combat Employment. The theory is that you disperse your jets to small, rough airfields to avoid missile attacks. It sounds smart, but it is a logistical nightmare. An F-15E burns 30,000 pounds of fuel per mission. It drops 10 tons of ordnance. You cannot supply that kind of volume to a dozen scattered desert airstrips indefinitely. Eventually, the logistics chain snaps, and the moment the Iranian missile forces, the high-altitude wall, lock onto those coordinates, the land-based air power is neutralized. The hammer on the ground is glass. It breaks. Second, look at the limitations of the Abraham Lincoln. The Lincoln is operating in the stand-in role. Its primary weapon is the F-35C from VMF A314. This aircraft is designed to penetrate the Bavar 373 air defense network. To do that, it must be clean. No external fuel tanks, no external missiles. Everything is tucked inside the fuselage to maintain that microscopic radar cross-section. This creates a volume trap. The F-35 can kill a specific radar site. It can assassinate a specific command bunker, but it cannot wipe out an armored division. It cannot sink a swarm of 200 fast attack craft. It lacks the magazine depth. It is a sniper rifle. You don't use a sniper rifle to stop a riot. This is the gap. The U.S. Navy has the eyes, the Lincoln, and the power, the F-15, but they lack the sustainable mass. Enter the George H.W. Bush. This ship brings Carrier Air Wing 7, CVW-7, the heavy wing. Look at the flight deck of CVN 77. You will not see a single F-35C. You will see rows of FA-18EF Super Hornet, Block 3. To the amateur, this looks like a downgrade. Why use the old jet? To the strategist, this is the solution. Because the Lincoln is already in the theater providing stealth coverage, the Bush does not need to hide. The Super Hornets on CVN 77 operate in beast mode. They utilize every single external hardpoint on the wings. They are not carrying 2 bombs internally. They are carrying 10 bombs externally. They are flying with extended-range fuel tanks. They are not snipers. They are dump trucks. They provide the volume of fire that the F-35 cannot. And most importantly, CVN 77 is the indestructible airfield. It runs on 2 Westinghouse A4W nuclear reactors. It moves at 30-plus knots. It cannot be targeted by the pre-programmed ballistic missiles that threaten the F-15s in Qatar. It brings its own runway. It brings its own city. It is strategic redundancy. If the airbases burn, the Bush keeps launching. If the Lincoln runs out of stealth munitions, the Bush keeps hammering with conventional steel. The Pentagon is building a kill box. Lincoln is the eye. F-15 is the land hammer. Bush is the sea hammer. It is a triad. Remove one leg, and the structure falls. Add CVN 77, and you have a cage that the enemy cannot escape. But let's go back to the machine itself. I called CVN 77 a mutant. That wasn't a metaphor. This ship is a collection of engineering anomalies that prove just how difficult it is to push the boundaries of naval physics. If you look at the waterline of CVN 77, you will see something that exists on no other U.S. aircraft carrier, a massive, protruding bulb extending forward from the hull. This is the bulbous bow. It is standard on commercial supertankers, but for the U.S. Navy, it was a radical experiment. Here is the fluid dynamics principle: destructive interference. When a standard bow cuts through the water, it creates a bow wave. This wave is energy, wasted energy. It creates drag that pulls the ship back. The bulb is designed to force a secondary wave of water up and over the bow. Mathematically, this secondary wave is exactly 180 degrees out of phase with the primary bow wave. Peak meets trough. They collide. They cancel each other out. The water flattens. The drag coefficient drops. The result is massive amounts of lift, buoyancy, and a significant increase in fuel efficiency for the reactor cores. But physics demands a trade-off. This bulb changes the center of buoyancy. It alters the hydrostatic stability of the hull. This is the root of the list. The ship fights its own efficiency. It is so buoyant forward that it becomes unstable laterally when loaded unsymmetrically. We traded stability for speed. We accepted the flaw to get the performance. Look closer at the superstructure. On a standard Nimitz class like the Eisenhower, the island is a massive block of steel bristling with spinning antennas. To a radar wave, that is a corner reflector. It screams, "I am here." CVN 77 changed the signature. Look at the island. It is smaller. It has moved further aft. The clutter of rotating radars is gone, replaced by a composite mass structure that absorbs energy rather than reflecting it. The navigation bridge windows are armored glass, installed at a specific downward angle. Why? To deflect the incoming radar pulse down into the ocean, killing the return signal. CVN 77 is not invisible. You cannot hide 100,000 tons completely, but it significantly reduces the radar horizon. It forces the enemy to come closer to get a firing solution. It proves that we were trying to evolve the hull form before we even had the new technology to fill it. The world obsesses over radar, but in the Persian Gulf, the real killer hides below the thermal layer. The Iranian Kilo-class submarine. It is a diesel-electric hole in the water, silent, deadly. Against a submarine, a carrier is usually a mobile factory. It is loud. The cavitation from the screws, the propellers, usually sounds like a freight train underwater. Cavitation is the enemy. When a propeller blade slices through water at high speed, the pressure on the trailing edge drops so low that the water boils. It creates vacuum bubbles. When those bubbles collapse, they explode. Shockwaves. Noise. CVN 77 fights this with geometry. It uses 4 bronze propellers, but the blade design is a radical departure from the previous 9 ships. The geometry is optimized to cut the water rather than tear it. It delays the onset of cavitation. The tactical result? It does not make the ship silent. That is impossible. But it defeats the enemy's math. It reduces the detection radius. Instead of hearing the carrier from 50 miles away, the Iranian submarine commander might only hear a vague rumble at 20 miles. It forces the enemy to come closer to verify the target, and when they come closer, they enter the kill zone of our destroyer escorts. CVN 77 uses silence as a trap. But here is where the Frankenstein reality hurts us. CVN 77 has the body of the future, stealth features, bulbous bow, but it has the heart of the past. It is powered by 2 Westinghouse A4W reactors. These are 1970s technology. They generate 260,000 shaft horsepower. That is enough to move the ship, but it is not enough to power the future. The new Ford-class ships use Bechtel A1B reactors that generate 3 times the electrical power. Why does this matter? Lasers, railguns, directed energy weapons. Those weapons eat electricity. CVN 77 has hit its energy ceiling. It has no electrical overhead. It cannot mount the massive lasers required to burn down drone swarms instantly. It relies on missiles. It relies on its escorts. This is the tragedy of the transitional model. It is the peak of the old world, staring at the new world, but unable to cross the threshold. It is a king that needs guards because it cannot hold the new sword. So, if the ship cannot power its own lasers, how does it survive a saturation attack? How does it stop 500 drones without going bankrupt firing 500 missiles? It outsources the violence. It brings the electronic wall. Look at the escort sailing alongside CVN 77. The USS Nitsa, the USS James E. Williams. Look at the superstructure. You see those massive, bulbous protrusions on the side of the bridge? The sailors call them muffin tops. The enemy calls them blackout. This is the ANSL Q-32V7, SEWIP, Block 3. In the past, electronic warfare was passive. It was about listening. SEWIP Block 3 is active. It is a weapon. It uses AESA, Active Electronically Scanned Array technology, to fire concentrated beams of microwave energy. Here is the war economics. An SM-2 interceptor missile costs $2 million. An Iranian Shahed drone costs $20,000. If you shoot missiles at drones, you lose the war financially before the first week is over. SEWIP changes the math. It does not use ammunition, it uses electricity. It targets the guidance circuits of the incoming drone. It fries